The Hoblers come moving down the sidewalk past his house, the dreadful old couple out for their evening constitutional. They must have been in their 80s or 90s, easily 40 years older than Deagle and his wife, and by the time they made it past the neighbor's driveway to the Deagles, some of the leaves on the trees had turned from green to red. "You're so mean," Deagle's wife said. "Don't make fun," she said. "I think they're sweet." Deagle didn't say anything. Maybe they were sweet, inspirational in their way, but he still didn't like them. The Hobler wife with her bowed, osteoporotic back, staring down loomingly. The Hobler husband, dazed and batty-looking with his tweed jacket over a pajama shirt, his hand on his wife's elbow as if escorting her to a formal dance. Deagle's wife had heard that he was an emeritus professor. Physics? Psychology? She couldn't remember. You could say they were sweet, or you could say they were something out of a horror movie. This was September, and his wife was dying pretty rapidly. She had about a month or so to go. The cancer had started in her ovaries, but now it was everywhere, and she had reached the stage where her lungs kept filling up with fluid, a kind of slow-motion drowning, and every few days Deagle and his wife would go in for a lung tap, which provided a little short-term relief. Deagle's wife could still make it up and down the stairs, though it took a while. They were having a lot of quiet time together. Deagle had taken time away from work, and their children were spending the fall at his sister's house, and in some ways it was like a kind of vacation for both of them. The days had begun to waver and lose their shape. Looking out the window, reading books aloud, he drove down the hill to buy her some lemon gelato. He cooked a chicken in a pot and brought the broth to her in a small bowl. Here was one of those wonderful spoons that they had stolen from a Chinese restaurant, and he lifted it to her lips. She didn't make it long enough to see the first snowfall, and by that time the Hoblers had vanished as well. The sidewalks were probably too slick for them, too treacherous, the cold air too hard on their old bones. It would run right through them, and they'd feel as if they would never be warm again. Sitting there, Deagle thought that perhaps they'd emerge again in spring. Late April, early May, tulips and daffodils and lilacs and budding trees. He wondered if that would make her happy to know that the Hoblers were still around. Down the block and back, down the block and back, getting a little exercise. Maybe, probably, she would like it. Sweet, she would say. As for Deagle, he didn't know what he would prefer. He would sit at the window peering out, and he didn't know whether he wanted to see them or if he hoped that they would never come again. An invader arrives in your computer and begins to glean the little diatoms of your identity, your name, your address, and so on, the various websites you visit as you wander through the internet, your username and password, your birth date, your mother's maiden name, favorite color, the blogs and news sites you read, the items you shop for, the credit card numbers you enter into your databases. Which isn't necessarily you, of course. You are still an individual human being with a soul and a history, friends and relatives and co-workers who care about you, who can vouch for you. They recognize your face and your voice and your personality, and you are aware of your life as a continuous thread, a dependable, unfolding story of yourself that you are telling yourself. You wake up and feel fairly happy in that bland, daily way that doesn't even recognize itself as happiness, moving into the empty hours that probably won't be anything more than a series of rote actions, showering and pouring coffee into a cup, and dressing and turning a key in the ignition, and driving down streets that are so familiar you don't even recall making certain turns and stops. Though yes, you are still present. Your mind must have consciously carried out the procedure of braking at the corner and rolling the steering wheel beneath your palms and making a left onto the highway, even though there is no memory at all of these actions. Perhaps if you were hypnotized, such mundane moments could be retrieved. They are written on some file and stored, unused and useless in some neurological clerk's back room. Does it matter? You are still you, after all. Through all of these hours and days, you are still whole. But imagine yourself in pieces. Imagine all the people who have known you for only a year or a month, or a single encounter. Imagine those people in a room together trying to assemble a portrait of you, the way an archaeologist puts together the fragments of a ruined facade or the bones of a caveman. Do you remember the fable of the 7 blind men and the elephant? It's not easy, after all, to know what you're made up of. Imagine the parts of yourself disassembled. Imagine, for example, that nothing is left of you but a severed hand in an ice cooler. Perhaps there is one of your loved ones who could identify even this small piece. Here, the lines on your palm, the texture of your knuckles and wrinkled skin at the joints in the middle of your fingers, calluses, scars, the shape of your nails. Meanwhile, the invaders are busily carrying away small pieces of you, tidbits of information. You hardly think about it, any more than you think about the flakes of skin that are drifting off of you constantly, any more than you think of the millions of microscopic dermidex mites that are crawling over you and feeding off your oil and skin cells. You don't feel particularly vulnerable with your firewall and constantly updating virus protection, and most of the predators are almost laughably clumsy. At work, you receive an email that is so patently ridiculous that you forward it to a few of your friends. Miss Emanuela Kunta, await your reply, it says in the subject line, and there is something almost adorable about its awkwardness. Dear one, says Miss Emanuela Kunta, I know that this mail will come to you as a surprise, since we did not know each other, but I believed that it is the will of God for us to know ourselves today, and I thank Him for making it possible for me to inform you of my great desire of going into long-time relationship and financial transaction for our mutual benefits. Emanuela Kunta is my name, residing in Abidjan. While I am 19 years of age, I am also the daughter of the late Mr. and Mrs. Godwin Kunta, with my younger brother Emmanuel Kunta, who is also 19 years because we are twins. My father was gold agent in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, before his sudden death on 20th February in a private hospital here in Abidjan. He called me on his bedside and told me about the sum of US $20 million. He deposited in a security company here in Abidjan, Ivory Coast, for business investment, that he used my name, his beloved daughter and only son, as the next of kin in depositing the money, because our mother died 13 years ago in a fatal car accident, and that we should seek for a foreign partner in any country of our choice where we will transfer this money for investment purposes for our future life. I humbly seek for your assistance to help us transfer and secure this money in your country for investment, and to serve as guardian of the fund, since we are still students, to make arrangement for us to come over to your country to further our education. Thanks, as you made up your mind to help orphans like us. I am offering you 20% of the total amount for your humble assistance, and 5% is mapped out to refund any expenses incurred in your transaction. Please, I urge you to make this transaction a confidentiality within your heart for security purposes, and please reply through my private email. Yours sincerely, Miss Emanuela Kunta. And it's pretty funny. Miss Emanuela Kunta is probably some fat 30-year-old white guy sitting in his mother's basement, surrounded by grimy computer equipment, fishing for a sucker. Who falls for this, you would like to know, and your co-workers all have anecdotes about the scams they have heard of, and the conversation meanders along for a while. It's almost 5 o'clock. But for some reason, driving home, you find yourself thinking of her, Miss Emanuela Kunta of Abidjan, Côte d'Ivoire, the orphan daughter of a wealthy gold agent, and she walks along a market street, the crowds of people and beautiful displays of fruit, a large blue bowl stacked with papayas, and a man in a pink shirt calls after her, and she turns, and her brown eyes are heavy with sorrow. Await your reply. Here in upstate New York, it's beginning to snow. You pull off the interstate and into the forecourt of a gas station, and at the pump you insert your card. It's authorized, and then you are approved, and you may begin to dispense fuel. A thick flurry of snowflakes blows across you as you insert the nozzle into your gas tank, and it is pleasant to think of the glittering lights of the hotels and the cars passing on the highway that runs along the edge of the Ibri Lagoon, which Abidjan encircles, the palm trees against the indigo sky, etc. Await your reply. And you wipe the snow out of your hair, and get back into your car and drive off toward an accumulation of the usual daily stuff. There is dinner to be made, and laundry to be done, and helping the kids with their homework and watching television on the couch, with the dogs resting her muzzle in your lap, and a phone call you owe your sister in Wisconsin, and getting ready for bed, brushing and flossing, and the few different pills that help regulate your blood pressure and thyroid, and a facial scrub that you apply, and all the rituals that are, you are increasingly aware, units of measurement by which you are parceling out your life. Safety Man is all shriveled and puckered inside his zippered nylon carrying tote, and taking him out is always the hardest part. Sandy is disturbed by him for a moment, his shrunken face, and she averts her eyes as he crinkles and unfolds. She has a certain type of smile ready in case anyone should see her inserting the inflator pump into his backside. There is a flutter of protective embarrassment, and when a car goes past, she hunches over Safety Man's prone form, shielding his not yet firm body from view. After a time, he begins to fill out, to look human. Safety Man used to be a joke. When Sandy and her husband Alan had moved to Chicago, Sandy's mother had sent the thing. Her mother was a woman of many exaggerated fears, and Sandy and Alan couldn't help but laugh. They took turns reading aloud from Safety Man's accompanying brochure. Safety Man, the perfect ladies' companion for urban living. Designed as a visual deterrent, Safety Man is a life-size simulated male that appears 180 pounds and 6 feet tall to give the others the impression that you are protected while at home, alone, or driving in your car. Incredibly real-seeming, with positionable latex head and hands and airbrushed facial highlights, handsome Safety Man has been field-tested to keep danger at bay. "Oh, I can't believe she sent this," Sandy had said. "She's really slipping." Alan lifted it out of its box, holding it by the shoulders like a Christmas gift sweater. "Well," he said, "it doesn't have a penis anyway. It appears it's just a torso." "Ugh," she said, and Alan observed its wrinkled, bog-man face dispassionately. Now, Alan said. He was a tall, soft-spoken man and was more amused by Sandy's mother's foibles than Sandy herself was. "You never know when he might come in handy." And he looked at it sidelong, gently ironic. "Personally," he said, "I feel safer already." And they'd laugh. Alan put his long arm around her shoulder and snickered silently, breathing against her neck while Safety Man slid to the floor like a paper doll. Now that Alan is dead, it doesn't seem so funny anymore. Now that she is a widow with 2 young daughters, Safety Man has begun to seem entirely necessary, and there are times when she is in such a hurry to get him out of his bag, to get him unfolded and blown up, that her hands actually tremble. Something is happening to her. There are fears she doesn't talk about. There is an old lady she sees at the place where she often eats. "Oh God," the lady will say. "Oh, Jesus, sweet Jesus, my Lord and Savior, what have I done?" And Sandy watches as the old woman bows her head. The old woman is nicely dressed, about Sandy's mother's age, speaking calmly, good posture, her gloved hands clasped in front of her chef's salad. And there is a man who follows Sandy down the street and keeps screaming, "Kelly," at her back. He thinks she is Kelly. "Baby," he calls, "do you have a heart? Kelly, I'm asking you a question. Do you have a heart?" And she doesn't turn. She never gets a clear look at his face, though she can feel his body not far behind her. Sandy is not as desperate as these people, but she can see how it's possible. At the home for unwed mothers, Nora still holds out hope that the baby will stop growing, that it will die. Around her, the stomachs of the girls are swelling, becoming taut, and their souls are deflating. There is a smell of old fruit and eucalyptus. There is a large box television playing the game show What's My Line, a dozen expressionless girls staring at the screen, some of them smoking cigarettes or biting on their nails or clasping their hands in their laps. One of them is knitting. This girl's hands move steadily, and the skein of blanket or sweater or shroud is slowly, line by line, becoming a cloth that covers the lump on her belly. Nora wants to kill this girl, whose face is as blank as a rabbit's. Or she wants to kill the happy celebrities that the girl is watching as they tell their jokes. Or she wants to kill herself. She moves along the hallway, walking, creeping, one hand cupped beneath her belly, the other on the wall. She isn't even showing yet, but still she holds her stomach uncertainly. There is a tickling feeling like a spider spinning a web inside her. Maybe she's only imagining it. The walls are cold, warty plaster, painted smooth, and she runs her hands across them as if they are braille, supporting herself as she goes. Doors lined up. She suspects that the rooms are all identical, though she hasn't seen anyone else's. She knows. A single bed, a night table with a lamp and a Bible, a desk with empty drawers, a closet with identical cheap polycotton maternity smocks on hangers, a window with a bare, snowy tree in the center of it. It's not quite a prison, not quite a hospital. A home, they call it, in the way that they call the repositories for the old and the insane homes. They put her in a home, her father had once said about a neighbor woman who had lost her mind when she got old, and now Nora herself is in such a place, being watched over, taken care of. You cannot lock your door in such a place, and her door won't even stay closed. She doesn't know why. The air pressure maybe, the wind, something. She has no way of knowing, but sometimes as she lies in the dark, the door will click open like an awakened eye. A shaft of light from the hallway will fall across her face. It happens frequently enough that she has taken to leaning a chair against the doorknob when she goes to sleep. In the dark, she can't keep herself from thinking that it is a ghost. She doesn't believe in ghosts exactly, but if they did exist, they would thrive in a place such as this. Girls have killed themselves here, she's sure of it. It's a deathly place, silent, cold. There's a kind of feeling you might have walking alone through a park in late autumn when a single leaf falls from a tree and twists slowly to the ground in front of you. January 6th, 1966. This is her 4th day of residence in the Mrs. Glass house, her 4th day of captivity, and it is beginning to sink in. There is no turning back. She should have accepted that fact a long time ago, but instead she still finds herself bargaining vaguely with her body, with God, thinking that it's possible that maybe a mistake has been made. The long months stretch in front of her, and already it seems that she is losing herself. There is nothing to do here but wait, months upon months, tunneled in front of her. January, they said, early January most likely. She sits in a chair by the window, reading her book, The Collector, by John Fowles. It's inappropriate, she knows. A brutal, tormented man and the beautiful, aristocratic woman he had taken captive, the back cover proclaimed, and the story upsets her. I hate the way I have changed. I accept too much, the woman says, and Nora underlines this passage as small, glimmering motes of snow pass by outside, as somewhere down the hall a transistor radio is playing AM love songs, the Monkees singing I'm a Believer. She reads, I am so far from everything, from normality, from light, from where I want to be. She closes the book and sits staring at her fingers, which don't seem like her own fingers. It is exactly the wrong book to be reading at the moment, she thinks, though a second thought, a happy book, an optimistic, escapist book, would be even worse. If she's going to read anything at all, it ought to be about suffering. She thinks about things that she will never tell people, ugly memories that make her wince when they enter her mind. Once, she punched herself in the stomach as hard as she could, hoping that it would dislodge. Once, she put something inside of herself, a knitting needle, which is what she had heard they used, but what exactly was she supposed to do to catch hold of it with? She imagined a floating piece of yarn with a glob of cells and blood at the end of it, hooking it, pulling it out. Once, she tasted bleach, but couldn't bring herself to drink it. Had the others done such things? If so, they don't talk about it. They don't talk about much, these girls, as if they are all spies. Mostly they glance at one another furtively, the scratch of silverware against plates, the sound of chewing, the television voices, the soft, private moan a girl will make when she walks down the hall. What is there to say? This is not a sorority, Mrs. Bibb tells them. Let's keep our socializing to a minimum, shall we? It is against the rules for the girls to sit in one another's rooms and speak privately. It is requested that the girls do not reveal the names of the towns they come from, and it is best they avoid speaking of their pasts at all, the fathers of their babies, the mistakes they have made, the families they've disappointed. It's against the rules for the girls to tell one another their last names, and she suspects that most of the first names are pseudonyms as well, like the girl who knits, who says her name is Dominica. Dominica, like the title of the popular song from grade school, the song by the singing nun. Oh, really? Nora says. That's an unusual name. And the knitting girl looks down. She has dark eyebrows that meet in the middle of her face, right above the bridge of her nose, and her chocolate-colored eyes focus on the movement of the needles between her fingers. She is a girl who is used to being made fun of, the sort of girl who clutches her books tightly in front of her and plunges through the hallways of high school like she is walking into a blizzard. Nora knew of a girl like that back in Little Bow, a girl named Alice, which they all thought was funny. A-Lice, they called her, and the boys sat behind her and flicked their boogers into her badly permed hair. A man who would make a girl like Alice or Dominica pregnant would have to be entirely evil, Nora decides. What are you knitting? Nora says at last, but the girl keeps her head down stubbornly, as such girls will. Someone, their mothers probably, taught them to suffer silently, taught them sticks and stones will hurt my bones, but words will never hurt me, taught them a quiet girl is better loved. Dominica pinches her lips as Nora looks at her. Well, Nora says, after the silence extends for a time. It's pretty, whatever it is. It's a blanket, says Dominica, finally. It's just a blanket. It's cold in this place. Sometimes a dead bird is just a dead bird. Jill told him that back when they were first dating. They had been walking together along the main street of town, holding hands. It was the first time they had held hands, and when their fingers clasped, she had looked at him and raised her eyebrows and grinned. And then a robin fell on the sidewalk in front of them. Apparently it fell out of the sky. Possibly a kind of bird of prey had accidentally dropped it, they decided later. But at the moment, they were both astonished. They stood staring at the limp body, and their handhold fell away. Oh my God, Jill said. And then, without another word, she grabbed his hand up again and held it tightly. Listen, she said fiercely. It's nothing. Sometimes a dead bird is just a dead bird. Which he'd always remembered. It was one of those little private phrases that married people take up and repeat to one another. It had become a mantra for him, though Jill had no idea that it was also an anecdote that he sometimes told his patients. One of those humorous but poignant personal stories that you introduce to help build trust, etc. Sometimes a dead bird is just a dead bird, he would say. When Jill told me that, I felt something kind of unlock inside me. Think of the constellations. We look up at the sky and think we see a flat surface with these bright dots called stars that we can connect. We put that cluster together and say it looks like a dipper or a bear. We put another together and it seems to be in the shape of a fish or a scorpion. We forget to imagine that the stars are in 3 dimensions. They aren't clustered together, they're light years, billions of miles apart. They only seem like they could line up from our one limited perspective here on the planet Earth. We think about our own problems that way too. We look at them in one dimension and it seems that they're all connected. We think that there's some image we can make out if only we connect the dots. But more than likely, the dots aren't connected. They're on separate geometric planes, like light years apart. I realize I have a choice. I can give a moment meaning, or I can choose to ignore it. It just depends on the kind of story I want to tell myself. We are always telling stories to ourselves, about ourselves. Sometimes he would make a gesture that was almost like a touch, though he actually rarely made skin-to-skin contact. But we can control those stories, he said. I believe that. Events in our lives have meaning because we choose to give it to them.